While most of my reviews seem to start with, "The game does a great job of rewarding players for blank," Hunt Down the Freeman goes through a great deal of effort to make sure that it doesn't. With only a small handful of exceptions, the game never rewards the player for exploring or trying to find unique solutions to problems, with the only exception I found being in the Arctic antlion tunnels when they open up into a large cavern. And that exception can only happen because the game decided to open up in that chapter for a bit, because in virtually any other circumstance for the rest of the entire game, the player is railroaded from point A to B with no ability to color outside the lines whatsoever. Needless to say, this game isn't exactly going for originality either. It's trying to be a story that can fit into the Half-Life canon, even going so far as to set up a sequel for if or when Half-Life 3 ever comes out. Good luck with that. Unfortunately, for reasons that'll make more sense in the narrative and mechanical design sections, the execution on this goal has a lot to be desired. It's also for most of the reasons that I've already mentioned that the game tragically doesn't give the player much to look forward to. Short of Half-Life veterans hoping that they get the pulse rifle or the gravity gun, there's no reward-based motivation for the player to move forward. No new mechanics to unlock, no exciting boss fights, no big action set pieces, not really, and no power fantasy. The core gameplay loop is generally spawn in, kill things, talk to an NPC, accomplish one objective that doesn't tend to have any meaningful consequences, cutscene, and then repeat. Still, at least this game has some longevity. Look man, I'm really reaching to compliment this game. I'm trying to be fair here. At least if the achievements are to be believed, the developers will introduce a new achievement every time that someone gets 100% in the game, so there's always something to strive for. Even if that's at the cost of knowing that you will never truly complete the game if the devs find out about it. This game is an excellent example of something that I've spoken up about before with the Callisto Protocol. Just because something is extremely linear doesn't mean that it is easy to traverse. Having levels and worlds that are designed to be intuitive, ensuring that necessary details jump out at the player so that they know where to go, does. Hunt Down the Freeman, on the other hand, just doesn't. There are pointless dead ends everywhere, the worst of which are actually lit up or visually distinct in such a way that would otherwise lead the player to think that they're important, or vice versa. The way that the player needs to go is often somewhere borderline hidden on the way to said dead end. There's a tunnel full of claymores that will insta-kill you from anywhere, which can only be traversed if you bumble around long enough to find a handprint by accident, which indicates that you can now climb a pipe in a way that you've never done before, not even in the tutorials. Invisible walls are even more common than the dead ends, and comprise many of them. There's the infamous pitch-black Arctic antlion burrows, which you have to navigate with a limited number of flares, and good luck if you use too many in the wrong places. And the biggest and most glaring example I can think of is nearly an entire chapter long. Please, let me break out my old D&D DM energy, and allow me to paint you a word picture. You and all of your comrades have escaped in a small convoy, only to be stopped by barriers in a nearby town. You disembarked to lower all of the barriers and moved forward. However, despite this, the truck with all of your men stays behind. Nevertheless, you find yourself at an impasse by road, and you need to find your way out of town by going through a factory on foot. After a brief, yet consequence-free, side quest of saving all the trapped workers, you do not get to progress through the door that you opened to let them escape. Instead, you exit the factory in the same way that you came in, only to find yourself in an entirely different place than where you started. With no direction, you stumble from light source to light source until finding your way over a guarded bridge. There, you scale a lighthouse, which is then violently blown up the moment you reach the top. However, this was a simple yet magical teleporting explosion, as you are completely fine in the waters below, and the entire lighthouse that was just destroyed is entirely unharmed. You get ashore, and you find that all of your comrades that were abandoned behind multiple traffic blockades, a Twilight Zone factory, and all of the water in the port, a town back, somehow managed to beat you here. The level design is so sloppy and baffling that not only is it an absolute chore to find your way through, but the world itself manages to be so incohesive so as to break continuity. Hunt Down the Freeman is surprisingly non-buggy in the same sense that the human race is surprisingly not extinct. Despite its best efforts, the game never froze or crashed for me once. The strong majority of what I would normally consider bugs are more realistically features of poor programming. Enemies conga lining toward you in single file, standing entirely still even when damaged because you weren't in a designated range, or killing each other aren't the result of broken code, they're the result of code doing exactly what it was told to do, and what it was told to do was play dead. That, for the most part, really covers everything physically wrong with Hunt Down the Freeman in a nutshell. Every visual quirk that I would say is something breaking in another game is just a poorly implemented thing here. Everything mechanically weird isn't jank because the game didn't know what to do with your inputs, it's just jank because they were designed to work that way, and they just don't make sense. Although, speaking of glitching as intended, one significant exploit is that players can still use the SV cheats console command to circumvent the game in its entirety via no-clip and God mode. Although, in a massively ironic twist, glitches and stability may very well be the highest scoring category that Hunt Down the Freeman gets. Hey, look at that, we're over 1,000 subscribers, so the sub counter went away. Subscribe to make sure it stays away, and of course, beware spoilers from this point forward. Hunt Down the Freeman is set between the events of Half-Life 1 and 2 as a spiritual successor, if not spin-off, to Half-Life Opposing Force. Much like Opposing Force, the player character is not Gordon Freeman, but a US Marine who is sent in during the Black Mesa incident to clean house before the 7-hour war breaks out. Things go sideways when Sergeant Mitchell Shepard finds himself killing his fellow soldiers and government agents rather than the scientists and monsters he was assigned to. He then catches up to a distress call only to find all of his men dead, get kicked in the chest, and then bludgeoned to death with a crowbar by a man wearing an HEV suit. Mitchell, in his dying words, swears that no matter who, what, or how long it takes before he dies, he will kill the man in the suit, not realizing the irony of the fact that he's dying now. The G-Man, of course, then makes an appearance, with his employers intrigued by Mitchell's conviction. G-Man indirectly tells Mitchell that the man he wants to kill is Dr. Freeman, before reviving him on the condition that he keeps his promise in due time. A deal that would carry Mitchell's quest for revenge and the plot of this game onward for the next 20 years across 3 time skips. That premise is unfortunately as far as we get before things start to get very weird, the first being the fatal flaw of the motivation of Mitchell to begin with. He knew nothing about Gordon Freeman whatsoever until G-Man offhandedly mentions him, with the exception of one thing: he's one of the Black Mesa staff. Meaning that Mitchell has effectively sworn very personal revenge on a man whose only crime was defending himself and not wanting to be massacred like his peers. Shortly thereafter, we meet Nick, who becomes Mitchell's first and most enduring ally in the midst of the end of the world, who, during the aforementioned "all of your abandoned allies from 2 towns back somehow beat you to the ship" thing in the level design, suddenly has beef with Mitchell out of nowhere for allegedly being cursed, something that had never been brought up before, with said curse being why Mitchell is responsible for every superior officer dying thus far. This is despite the fact that A, Mitchell is in no way directly responsible for their deaths, and so it makes no sense to blame him specifically. B, Nick was also present for every single encounter involving a superior officer, so he is just as responsible as Mitchell if we're going to start slinging baseless blame. And C, the superior officers all die off-screen for no explained reason other than presumably dying in battle on the way to wherever the next cutscene is. So not even the player has a good excuse for this action. The situation only makes sense whatsoever if Nick were aware of Mitchell's deal with G-Man, except he isn't, and even if he is, literally no part of G-Man's deal had anything to do with any of Mitchell's men or his superiors. The deal was just between him and Freeman. In the meanwhile, Mitchell's character arc seems to have changed the moment that one of the devs played Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance. He begins as at least slightly sympathetic, or at least the game does everything in its power to make us sympathize with him by force. Family members commit suicide in front of him, his brother is taken by Child Protective Services, he becomes an alcoholic who in a drunken stupor decides to join the Marines in an attempt to make a difference. And even as nonsense a villain as Freeman makes, at least the idea that Mitchell wants vengeance for all of his slaughtered men is reasonable. However, all of that is before he effectively became this weird combination of Monsoon and Sundowner from Rising: Revengeance, preaching strong, prey upon the weak ideology and liberating a bunch of oppressed children in order to turn them into his own personal child soldier army.
Are those children?
Yes.
I know what you think, and I have the same feelings. It disgusts me.
I don't think that's disgusting at all.
Excuse me.
That's just nature playing out its own game. It's always been between predator and prey.
Don't be ashamed. It's only nature running its course.
And going from a forcibly sympathetic soldier to a Metal Gear villain somehow isn't the weirdest thing, narratively speaking. That would be that, in a twist which renders even the very name of the entire game irrelevant, Gordon Freeman and Mitchell have never even met. Freeman doesn't know that Mitchell exists, as it's revealed through what can only be described as G-magic, that the man who bludgeoned Mitchell to death in the prologue is actually Adam, the Black Ops sniper that Mitchell makes an alliance with very shortly after meeting Nick in the same chapter. During this reveal, it's made known that Adam also made some sort of deal with G-Man involving the killing of Mitchell so that G-Man could make a deal with him too. Then, when it is revealed to Nick that Adam, a close and enthusiastically loyal comrade in arms for over 20 years, secretly orchestrated everything, Nick's response is, that makes sense. A plot point which only gets wrapped up once the game uses the Dark Knight Rises, "You have my permission to die" quote twice. Hunt Down the Freeman does, at least on principle, try good things mechanically. It tries adding gameplay conventions that have been successful elsewhere on top of an already established and beloved foundation that Half-Life set for it. Sadly, just because there are some good ideas does not mean they were executed on well, so let's run through each of the mechanics that were added to Half-Life 2 and go over why they do or don't work. The best implemented of all the new mechanics is the ability to aim down sights, which speaks for itself. It makes certain guns much easier to land hits with, although others, such as the pulse rifle, clearly were not meant to be viewed from an ADS angle, as the clunky design obstructs a lot of your view. Various utility items like a Splinter Cell style night vision system and a set of binoculars can be set to a key that toggles them on and off. However, it's iffy as to which equipment, if any, you have at any given point in time. Moreover, and something that I saved from glitch instability to bring up here instead, is that after the first time the game took away those pieces of equipment, the keybind no longer worked after getting them back. Even after I went into the menus and rebound the key meant for night vision, it just didn't work for the rest of the game. The game also gives you the ability to go prone in order to traverse openings that are too small for you to crouch through. However, Mitchell's model collision seems to be incredibly inconsistent. Sometimes you can crouch through an opening, and other times you have to go prone for the exact same size hole. Going prone also offers no real benefits anywhere else in the game, as it doesn't protect you in a fight, and nor can it be used in any clever ways other than sometimes having to crawl through vents. Although in a unique addition, the devs seem to have tried building a fully custom parkour system for traversal. Unfortunately, this is one of the things that they absolutely could have looked at other games like Titanfall or Mirror's Edge for inspiration on, and they just didn't. In order for it to work, you are required to put your weapon away, so you can't climb or clamber in a fight. Then, in order to clamber, you need to sprint to a wall, then jump, and then depending on the alignment of the sun and the moon, either hold or double tap the jump button. The clamber button also allows you to climb up very specific models of pipes, except for when it doesn't, and except for that one time that you have to climb a different model of pipe for the Claymore room. The struggle of this section is that the majority of what I focus on in terms of criteria have to do with determining if the visual and sound design give the game a unique and memorable visual or audio identity, how the visual and sound designs are leveraged to inform the player about changes in game state and the world around them, and or how they are otherwise used to reinforce good game design principles. I do that so that a minimal amount of the score has to do with visual fidelity, otherwise older or stylized games would instantly tank here. But for Hunt Down the Freeman, almost none of that matters. The game can't have a unique or memorable identity because it has no identity of its own. It's just Half-Life, but worse. The screen gets a red overlay to inform you whenever you're getting hurt, but that's really it in terms of informing the player on how the game is changing. The best visual design detail in the entire game is arguably the title screen, which changes to reflect what Mitchell looks like depending on which stage of the game the player has progressed through. Otherwise, level assets are disjointedly stitched together in such a way that they don't even align properly. Lighting is used incredibly inconsistently to guide the player, which is even worse than not using it at all, because now the player is left to question whether or not the light they're looking at leads to where they're supposed to go, or to just another dead end. The NPCs are almost all repeated models with the exception of about 5 of them, and for a great example, in the tutorial, there's just one model of a white guy and one model of a black guy copy and pasted around the room, with the drill sergeant model that's also copy pasted in the room across the hall. If we're going to talk visual fidelity, obviously the game looks incredibly dated since the base template it was built upon is from 2004. But more importantly are the details, like how various textures interact with lighting in a way that seemingly makes them glow in the dark. These chairs are the most reflective chrome since that one episode of SpongeBob, and the sky reflects off of tiles even inside of this office building. Even with Mitchell himself, and maybe this is just a me problem so I haven't allowed this to affect the score, but look at his scars. I didn't put together until the final act of the game that all of his scars are supposed to be crowbar wounds. A crowbar doesn't cut things. It wouldn't make scars like that. At worst, it would pierce and stab in and then potentially rip out huge chunks of flesh when pried back out. Those scars weren't made by a crowbar, they were made by X23. In terms of sound design, again, everything is lifted from Half-Life and Gmod except for a bunch of stock sound effects and choices in mixing. Say, for example, if you want to make a loud sound happen inside, you would need to slightly echo it before making it immediately fade out. Instead, the sounds just play over each other and it's incredibly loud. The voice acting showcases a particularly significant problem in the audio design in that, regardless of the quality of the actual acting, none of the voice actors had the same audio quality, let alone the same recording hardware. It's very easy to assume that each voice actor had their own recording setup, if we can even call it that, rather than each of them recording off of the same hardware, as some sound like they were going through legitimately good mics and setups, while others sounded like they were just recorded through various qualities of gaming headsets. And in terms of the stock sound effects, I'm not going to say that this sounded bad at the time, just that this is another personal moment that I wanted to share with you. I parkoured my way up this wall and under the shipping container, and immediately had Nom flashbacks questioning where I'd heard that sound before. Take a listen.
So how did you like that game, monkey?
It was okay.
What? You...
It was no Donkey Kong, though. That is a pie level.
This is one of the hardest subjective sections that I've ever had to write, and yes, I do actually write these just so they flow a little bit better, because it's so hard to organize my thoughts on it. Ultimately, the reason I wanted to play it and review it is the same reason that I wanted to make an entirely separate video on it, but it's something that multiple other people have said before, and I didn't want to just plagiarize someone else's idea for an entire video, much less for profit. With that being said, though, most of my opinions and feelings revolve around the topic that I'm dancing around, so let's just get on with it. Speaking of plagiarism, I was really torn by the fact that this game is essentially just a bad fan game, except it isn't just a fan game. It's a game that was made to fit into the Half-Life canon, set in Half-Life's world with Half-Life's characters, using Half-Life and Counter-Strike assets, more than likely Half-Life and Counter-Strike's code, using Valve's source engine, and being sold, not distributed, sold on Valve, the owner and creator of Half-Life's own marketplace for PC games for actual, real money. 1 out of 10 opinion score. I'm not playing it again unless someone else pays me to, and I played it so you don't have to. It's one thing to do what Black Mesa later did and get approval openly by Valve before release. But Hunt Down the Freeman not only seems to have been made with such a sense of entitlement that it deserved to be approved and sold in spite of what it is, without approval, but then also got that entitlement validated by virtue of the fact that it was allowed to be sold on Steam. Which means that Hunt Down the Freeman seems to be getting a silent seal of endorsement from Valve, despite the fact that it is a bastard child made from the remains of Valve's own intellectual property. The audacity of this game is unreal. And yet, even with all of that, I'm still torn, because at the heart of it all, this is clearly someone's passion project. Someone, probably Birkin, was a huge fan of Half-Life and had a big idea for a story that could be set in that universe, and so they collected a team of community members to make it happen, and they built it. They had a dream, and regardless of the cost, they saw it through. And now I'm just another critic on the internet dumpstering their dream in spite of the fact that I'm just a guy with a dream too. So this game went from something that was really fun to make fun of to something very bittersweet in retrospect. But enough about what I think. Is the game actually bad? To cap things off, I want to share my favorite line from my notes on the game. Larry was funny. They just killed him off screen. I miss Larry. Now I may never see Larry again, but I will see you, yes you, next time.